and he slots it home. And the Tigers get the lead they were looking for. It's 1-0 Trinity.
At Trinity University, we have a history of being part of the community. Whether through volunteering, through research, education, and celebration, we seek to participate and grow our community. At our core, we believe that our campus is a partner with the city, that we share a common interest and desire to engage and educate San Antonio. From our first few days on campus as first years, we start out volunteering and getting out in the community, and it doesn't stop there.
We believe that education shouldn't happen just within our walls. Through lectures, innovations, internships and careers, and art exhibits, we want to educate and inspire our community.
San Antonio has provided us countless opportunities.
Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for returning, and those of you here for the first time, welcome to Trinity University. It is with great pleasure and honor that I greet you back again to continue our Interfaith Conference, Religion and Climate Change, taking our planet back. Again, to those who were here yesterday, welcome back. Those who are here for the first time, it's great to have you here. For those of you that don't know me, I am Dr. John Burke from the Political Science Department here at Trinity. The preparation for the conference has been a joint effort of Trinity faculty, staff, students, and external partners, both here in San Antonio and from across the nation. The principal sponsors are Trinity and the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. Other partners who have helped greatly with donations and in-kind costs are the Departments of Political Science, Religion, Geosciences, the Trinity Spiritual Center, the following student groups: ECHO Allies, Global Health Initiative, Muslim Student Association, Trinity Unitarian Universalists, and also the APO Service Fraternity is comprising many of the volunteers you see today. And also the following community partners: Sierra Club, Climate Action SA, St. Mary's University Ministry, Catholic Relief Services, Southwest, the Soul Center, the Sustainability and Interfaith Offices of the City of San Antonio, and the San Antonio Interfaith Environmental Network. Thank you very much to all of you, and I know many of you are here from these organizations today, and we'll be doing breakouts later. So indeed, we are an interfaith community in attendance, and this is an interfaith conference, so please feel free to pray and engage in your own spiritual practice as you see fit throughout the day. In that spirit then, Ms. Dawn Martin, Director of the Soul Center, in tandem with the St. Mary's University Music Ministry, will lead us in our opening hymn and prayer. Dawn and Wayne.
So I invite you then to just pause, acknowledge the presence of God in our midst, and focus your eyes on the screen as we pray both visually, internally, and physically. So we pray.
And now if you'll join me in a moment of corporate prayer and reflection. For the cool breeze of the morning, we give thanks. For the diversity of life on this planet that invites us to learn about, treasure, and ensure its continued flourishing, we give thanks. For this tiny blue marble of ocean, land, and sky in an immense cosmos, we give thanks. For the capacity together this day to listen to and to learn from one another, we give thanks. For hearts and minds united in peace, and for practices of ecological sustainability, we give thanks. Creator of all worlds and of all peoples, bless everyone gathered for this moment. Guide us toward understanding and toward informed action. Amen.
Thank you to both Dawn and also Wayne. I just have a few housekeeping issues to get to before we get to the substance of our first session today. Again, for those of you that weren't here yesterday, we have student volunteers dressed in Trinity maroon swag. If you have any questions, especially today, trying to find the restrooms, which are really just outside this auditorium, or getting to the classrooms for the breakout sessions after this session, or any help with any other issues, just please check in with them. If any of you need transportation back to your car later in the day, we will have a golf cart outside to transport you. Could I have that slide about the Earth Week? Okay. This conference is, in many respects, the kickoff here at Trinity to Earth Week, culminating with Earth Day. These are different events here on campus being put forth by the Echo Ally student group in conjunction with the Sustainability Committee on campus, so we certainly encourage you to come back during this week to take advantage of those events. And if you'll bear with me a second, I have one more announcement. On April 20th, there is going to be Invaders of the Texas Citizen Scientific Basic Training, and that's going to be from 9 to 4 at Phil Hardberger Urban Ecology Center. So become a citizen scientist at the Phil Hardberger Park Ecology Center. That's on 8400 Northwest Military Highway here in San Antonio. That's on Friday the 20th from 9 a.m. To 4 p.m. So if you need more information on that, check with me later in the day. Thank you. We will not be taking formal breaks during this conference, so please feel free to go to the bathroom as you see fit. Now, the one thing is, just a fair warning in this room, as an instructor, this is a great room for keeping students in their seats during class because they can't get up easily to leave on the sides of the aisles. However, for purposes like at this conference, if someone's sitting in the middle and other people are on the aisles, please be courteous to them as they get up, okay? And certainly if you need to go, just excuse yourself. And we have community cooperation on this. Or you can also move toward the center to facilitate this exit from the rows. Usually I have to tell people to move up. This is the first time I've ever had to tell people to move in. But anyway, please feel free to go to the bathroom as you see fit. And again, the restrooms are located just outside the auditorium. Our charge today, as both people of faith and goodwill, is to draw upon our respective spiritual and ethical traditions to envision and realize political, socioeconomic relations that truly care for God's creation. Especially through our breakouts later this morning, we will project the implications of this ecological vision for economic initiatives, public policy, personal and group moral conduct, educational pedagogy, and faith-based ministry. Our format for this principal speaker session will be Mr. Douglas Melnick from the City of San Antonio is our principal speaker. He will have 35 minutes. Then the respondent, Ms. Carol Fisher of Climate Action SA, will have 10 minutes to give a thoughtful response. And then we will open the session to questions, the first two of which I'm going to ask from students, if they are available. At Trinity University, we do pride ourselves on discourse that emphasizes the capacity for listening to diverse perspectives, but especially in a manner both civil and temperate. And that'll be our expectations for this morning's session. One of our partners actually is Coach Paul McGinley, from our soccer coach here at Trinity. And so if things get out of hand today, he provided me with some teaching aids. And so the first warning will be this, and the second warning will be this. Then the person has to sit out the next event, if you're a soccer aficionado. To begin in our first session, I call upon San Antonio Councilman Roberto Trevino to introduce our speaker. Roberto.
Good morning and welcome to the Religion and Climate Change Taking Our Planet Back conference. Thank you to Trinity University and all the great partners here hosting this event. I believe we as elected leaders can implement programs and policies that benefit the environment while still helping those in need. An example would be the San Antonio Under One Roof program. The program installs a high reflectance roof for a home who meet the age requirements, veteran, disability requirements, and income qualifications. These roofs, high reflectance roofs, can have multiple benefits, including reducing energy bills by decreasing air conditioning needs, improving indoor comfort for spaces that are not air conditioned, decreasing roof temperature, which may extend the roof service life. It benefits the environment, especially when the buildings in a community have them, through reducing local air temperatures, also known as the urban heat island effect, as well as reducing air pollution, lower peak electricity demands, and reducing power plant emissions. UTSA, who has tracked the White Roof program since its inception, has the data to confirm this. CPS Energy even created a rebate program based off of this data. Homeowners who install a roof like this can receive a rebate based on the reflectance rating and the square footage of the home. There are ways to combat the effects of climate change at every level of government. Officials just cannot be afraid to think outside of the box and create innovative solutions. Partnerships with local universities like Trinity are essential for creating well-informed climate policy. Furthermore, policy administrators like Doug Melnick play a vital role in San Antonio's climate strategy. I'd like to welcome the director of the city's sustainability office, Doug Melnick, to do his presentation. And go Spurs, go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So Carol and I were joking about, I said, I can't do 35 minutes, and then she said, I can't do 10 minutes. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about a really important subject. So you had a tough choice this morning, March for Science or this, so it's interesting that you chose this, but thank you for coming. I'd just like to point out a few people. Eloisa Portillo Morales, she's a sustainability planning manager with the City of San Antonio. And then part of the planning effort that we're undergoing right now around climate, CPS and UTSA are key partners, and we have Kim Stoker and Todd Horseman from CPS who are here. So for any of the really hard questions around energy and generation, those are the folks that you should direct the questions to. So climate change is a big topic. I was trying to frame this conversation going forward about sort of the background of what this is, why it's something that it's important for us to work on, and some of the policy questions that we need to address it's not just as a city, but as a global community. And the thing that's so challenging about this is it isn't something that's easy to solve. And we really need to sort of dig into understanding what led us to this point in time. And that's one of the things I'll be touching on. But first, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. So who, with a show of hands, who believes climate change is happening? Okay. And then who believes it's caused by human activity? Okay, so we pretty much know, you guys understand it. Skip that one. One of the things, if it was a bigger group, really seeing if, as our population grows and changes, are different perspectives coming into the community. And then students, yeah, it's, just concerned citizens. Yeah, so I mean, it's, you guys, and I think towards the end we'll talk about what we need you to do as far as helping us with this conversation, because that's really sort of the big thing that needs to happen right now. Is it's making people aware across the community that this isn't just a global issue. It's a local issue, and there's a local role and responsibility that exists. So a little bit about me. I came from the environmental sector, but mostly sort of from field biology. I used to study small mammals in western Pennsylvania. Studied flying squirrels, which are pretty much the cutest thing you'll ever see in your life. I was doing some other work studying plant biology and bogs, and one day I was doing a research study. It was the middle of the summer. I was in waders up to my chest, getting eaten alive, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. So I went to local government thinking that'll be much better. And so here, this is me in Albany, New York, with the mayor there, who was there for about 25 years. Working for a strong mayor form of government is very different than what we have here. But I was the director of planning. We created an energy and sustainability office, and I look at that picture, I really didn't have that much more hair, but there was a little bit more hair. Came to San Antonio, wanted to go to a big city. Don't know if you recognize him. These other two people, John Dugan on the right was the past planning director, and Terry Bellamy was assistant director of transportation and capital improvement. We were sort of the three amigos of the SA Tomorrow plans. I'm proud to say I'm the only one that's still here. So, and that was really sort of the sort of like trifecta of figuring out how do we manage this growth, the 1 million people coming, additional people in San Antonio by 2040, and what does that mean for our community's long-term sustainability? More housing demands, more economic activity, more cars, and so what do we do to manage that? I've been working on air quality. Non-attainment is potentially just around the corner, although we're sort of still in the throes of discussions internally and externally with EPA. I think your guess is as good as mine what's going to happen. But it's a real page turner, and I think but we'll hopefully know something relatively soon. And then this is what we're working on now. When Mayor Nirenberg came on board last June, the first order of business at Council was a resolution in support of the Paris Climate Accord. And where we are right now, working with our partners, with the community, different stakeholders, what does a Paris compliant path look like for us? And then it's got the little hat on it for Texas. How do we do it that's going to fit in with San Antonio to make sure it's something that's going to resonate here, but get us to where we need to go? So, and you guys are probably, some people have seen this before. I don't know, I think it's funny. I'm from New York, upstate, and downstate is a big deal. I grew up in Long Island, that little green part, Suffolk County, and Albany is just under the E. So there's it's not Manhattan. But why did I come here? It was because of this. This was basically, snow's really great. The first snowfall of the year, it's beautiful. Everybody goes out, and by the end, everybody's just absolutely miserable, and everybody's just super annoyed. And this isn't as funny anymore, because when you look at the news, climate patterns are changing. I mean, they're still getting hit with snowstorms, and we're in the spring. When you start looking at the scientific findings that are talking about, well, we're seeing shifts in ocean currents, and we're seeing shifts in and jet streams and everything that we knew about what our climate and weather was is changing. And so, I guess the first question is, is our climate changing? I think we've known for a long time. This is Dr. Arrhenius, who was a scientist who back in 1896 came to the conclusion that as you increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, ground level temperatures rise. And then again, if we're watching the news, we continue to see report after report that, industry knew, major oil companies knew that the burning of fossil fuels contributes to climate change. And so where we are right now is, what do we do with all this information? There's consensus in the academic community. Over 97% of active climate scientists believe that climate change is occurring and it's being caused by human activity. What do we do with that? Because it's a pretty major shift from what we've been doing since the turn of the century. And so you've all probably seen this. This shows the last 400,000 years of carbon dioxide rates in the atmosphere. There's always been fluctuations, but you can see, at the turn of the century, there's a spike, pretty considerable. And in 1950, we rose above, about 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere for the first time. So again, why? And I have some slides coming up in a little bit that sort of deconstruct why that happened. Because I think unless we really know sort of what the policy decisions that potentially were taken that moved us in that direction, we're not going to be able to figure out what policy direction we need to take now in order to try to reverse that trend. And so, what do these emissions mean? There's various emission scenarios that climate scientists use. High emissions scenario or lower emissions scenario, based upon activities and actions that we take right now as a global community. For all intensive purposes, what we're hearing from the scientific community is we're on track for the highest emission scenario. And why is that important? Well, it correlates to the graph on the right with projected global temperature increases. And so unless we take action pretty quickly, we'll be basically facing the more extreme temperature increase, which is going to, at the end of the day, cause a ripple effect in terms of climate impacts that we're going to experience, not just globally, but also at the local level. And this is something that, our good friend Katharine Hayhoe always highlights, sort of planning for the future based upon looking in the past isn't going to serve us very well. If we're driving down the road, but we're looking in the rearview mirror to tell us where to go and there's a curve ahead, we're going to slam right into the wall. So if we're basing our decisions for the future on what the climate was in the rearview mirror, that's not going to work. And so we need to start making some adjustments. And then I just wanted to touch really briefly on the idea of faith. One of the things that as we're having this conversation in San Antonio, it's really complicated around climate because there's the sort of the moral imperative part of it. This is something that we need to do. It's the right thing to do. But it slams right in the face of, well, how do we do it? What are the local considerations? What are the costs? How do we actually institutionalize and make change? None of this is necessarily going to be easy or without costs. So how do we balance that moral imperative with, okay, in this day and age, in our political situation, our economic situation, how do we start making those changes? So in terms of the sort of the moral imperative, we've seen this. I mean, how many people saw this and it was just gut-wrenching? This is climate change is occurring. We have species that are just being devastated. What responsibility do we have for that? And I think it's a big question. What does San Antonio have to do with the Arctic ecosystem? But again, it's translating. Our actions do have global impact. This is it's a house in Alaska that's basically just, that whole community is just disappearing. We have climate refugees now. People are having to relocate. This is in Afghanistan. This gentleman had said that they're seeing just more and more drought. Again, we're not necessarily seeing these extremes in San Antonio yet, but one, they are potentially coming down the pike, but are our actions contributing to this? And again, more flooding. This is over in Central Pacific, again, another lost community. But it's not just some far off land. We all remember Katrina, 2005, devastating, still recovering. The other real big thing is it didn't hit everybody the same way. The most vulnerable population was impacted, where those with means were able to relocate and had insurance, and these communities are still trying to recover. $125 billion in damage. But then that wasn't it. This was Harvey. Again, who was impacted the most? And they're struggling right now with what to do. The decades and decades of growth based upon certain models that don't have the idea of resilience built into their system. So something like this is going to happen again. And then what are they going to do? But it wasn't just even Houston, it's San Antonio. This is a shelter in San Antonio from Harvey. Even if we didn't get hit, it still had impacts on us. And everybody remembers that. And what's amazing is how quickly we forget. I remember when this happened and we were all waiting online for gas. I thought, this is it. This is the turning point. People really understand this. It wasn't that long ago. I don't think anybody's thinking about this anymore. And so that's what this conversation is why it's so important. This is why this planning process that's going on is so important, and having people involved in this conversation, because it is while it is a global issue, it is local at heart. And then this is something that I'm sure if you remember, the River Authority did some modeling. What happens if Harvey would have hit San Antonio? And there was lots of discussion about, it's apples and oranges. We wouldn't necessarily see those levels of precipitation. Houston's topography is completely different. It's very flat. It's a bowl. Whereas San Antonio and Bexar County has more elevation. So they very modestly made some adjustments as far as how much precipitation we would receive. And this is, I think we're just up to the northwest of all this. But basically looking at what that precipitation would do to San Antonio, and looking at one little piece of downtown, realizing that it would flooding would expand beyond what the normal floodplains were. And so it's got real implications to San Antonio. How do we prepare for this? Who does this impact? Who can bounce back from this and bounce forward the most effectively? And so what are the other impacts of climate change? And that's really sort of what it's about. And one of the things that I like to mention is, even if we don't necessarily think this is such a big deal, there's lots of entities out there that have influence on our community's well-being that do. The military. The military is a huge presence in San Antonio, a huge economic driver, but also members of the military who are basically a fabric of this community. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. There's military directives that basically say, look, climate change is a big priority to our national security. It's going to cause us to be pulled into different actions across the globe. If we're not a resilient community, if we're not addressing flooding or transportation issues or air quality issues, does that jeopardize the military mission and could potentially cause us to lose some of the folks over at Joint Base San Antonio? Economic competitiveness. Moody's, major bond rating system that we really pride ourselves on in terms of having that best possible rating. They're putting out publications and letting investors and municipalities and companies know that they're using climate preparedness and resilience in their rating system. So even if we don't think this is such a big deal, if we're not prepared in their eyes, that could have real direct economic impact on our community. Public health, there's been countless studies by organizations such as the American Public Health Association and AMA that show there's a clear correlation between climate change and public health. We know it impacts our infrastructure, and I'll show a picture or two in a couple minutes. And we pride ourselves on being the only city in Texas with a World Heritage Site. Well, UNESCO released a study a few years ago that starts looking at, well, what's the impact on these World Heritage Sites as a result of climate change? So this hits things that really are very important to us. And so what are some of our vulnerabilities? We're not immune to wildfire. We are 465 square miles and growing. At that rural-urban interface, we're building, and there's wildfire risk. Vector-borne diseases. As it gets hotter, as we see more pathogens coming up from the equator, we'll see more cases of Zika or West Nile. We all remember the tornadoes, so there's impact on our infrastructure. Folks who work outside, we're used to heat, and I think one of the challenges when we start talking about the impacts of climate change, we can say, well, it's going to get hotter. It's like, well, it's always hot, but it's going to get hotter, and then starting to have a conversation with the community to understand what hotter means, and deciding, are we prepared for what that looks like? But what about the folks who work outside on a regular basis? What about the people who have to walk to the bus stop or walk to their job or to get the services they need? If it's hotter, it's not going to be that easy. Not everybody has a car that they can just jump into and get to where they need to go. And that's to the point of this image on the right. Where are our socially vulnerable populations? These are the folks who, in many cases, are probably the most sustainable members of our community. They probably use the least amount of water, least amount of electricity, rely on mass transit, walk. But are they in areas of where there's the most urban heat island impact or air quality impact, or living in food deserts where they don't have access to food? How do we make sure that these folks are being taken care of and prepared for what these impending impacts of climate change are? And so, just really quickly, why do we need to plan for climate change? Well, the question is, how does it impact our community and what we like about our community? How does it impact our ability to enjoy the river and our recreational resources? What does it do to the monarch butterfly migration that we cherish, or our cultural events that are so important? Again, our Alamo, military mission, and our children. And what's interesting is I did some research because I was talking to some of the area superintendents about their view on climate and preparedness, and they get it. Some of them are really talking about the millions of dollars that they continually have to reinvest in repairs of their schools as a result of hail damage, and it seems like there's more and more hail damage on a more regular basis. But I did some research, and there's a whole new area of research around resilient schools, climate resilient schools, and the key to that is, how do they make sure that they're they're being entrusted with the youth of a community? How do they make sure that they're taking care of them during a changing climate, whether there's more extreme weather events during the school day that they need to prepared for, or what happens when there's disruptions due to weather events where school is canceled, such as we see in Houston? How do you prepare for that? So this is something that really is beginning to take traction across sectors. And so I just wanted to revisit this very briefly, this idea of why the rise of carbon dioxide. What caused that spike? This is sort of an easy one to look at. I'm in no way condoning population controls, but just to think about, okay, we're growing. Our global population is exponentially growing. maybe we need to really think about how we're doing things. What policies need to be in place to help mitigate that growth. And the other thing to consider is, we all know the Henry Ford and his assembly line. Not everybody used to have cars. Suddenly, the personal automobile became a reality, and everybody had to have one. And then we started with building roads. The 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act basically put up $26 billion to pay for a 41,000-mile network of road. Well, did that possibly induce burning fossil fuels through driving everywhere? Well, that ends how we started developing new communities. That's Levittown. Getting out of the cities to suburban areas, single-use clusters, separating uses. It's not to say that there wasn't a good reason for folks wanting to get out of the city. My parents grew up in Brooklyn, and we lived on Long Island, and this is what they did. But if there were issues related to public health or density or what were the barriers to having folks really flourish in cities, the answer may not have just been to just use this model. Would there have been other models? And it gets down to this whole idea of unintended consequences. I don't think anybody who went down this road with this future development pattern that we're sort of stuck in right now had that as their primary focus was to cause climate change, but it was an unintended consequence. And that's why it's so important as we start developing a plan forward and a path forward, looking at new policies, really asking that question, what is the unintended consequences? And then there's, of course, the idea of consumption. We are a major consumer society, and that is a big component of producing emissions that lead to continued climate change. And so that gets us to San Antonio and our contributions and sort of the baseline for how we start developing policies going forward. And you can see this is a 2014 community emissions inventory. 60% came from buildings, the energy generated to supply those buildings, 36% transportation, and 4% solid waste. So to get those numbers down, what do we need to do? What do we need to do differently in terms of policies? And then this is just something that shows, the idea of climate change is really happening. As a part of the planning process that we have undergoing right now, we're going to be doing future climate projections through 2100, but this basically just shows historical climate data going back to 1960 from the San Antonio International Airport, and it shows, it's been getting warmer. So this isn't something that isn't necessarily happening. And then what do we use for policy direction? And that's sort of where I want to finish up on. The graph on the right really can't see it, but it basically shows what our community's vulnerabilities are. And the upper right is basically the most highest priority vulnerabilities, and then it basically works its way down to those that are less of a priority. But at the upper right, it's extreme heat and the impact on vulnerable populations. We're talking about flash flooding. How do we start preparing for those? And we're already having those conversations about what policies need to come into play to help mitigate those. And then on the left is really what's our pathway to a Paris-compliant plan? How do we reduce our emissions to make sure that when we meet what was committed to as far as our support for Paris? That's how do we make sure that we do not aid in contributing greenhouse gases that are going to bring global climate above 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. We already have policies that are in place. As the councilman who just got up and was talking about, the under one roof. Sorry, the under one roof program is a great, example of, a policy that's aiming at saving energy that is going to help us reduce emissions. CPS's energy conservation program, our tree preservation program, low impact developments. Oh man, emergency preparedness. There's lots of policies already that are in place. The key is how how do we stitch these together as well as others that are going to get us to where we need to go? And so, the idea of how do we get a handle on land use and growth? Well, the planning department's working on regional center planning. How do we increase density in these key areas? How do we create a better housing and jobs balance so people can live somewhere and work? And then how do we connect these through transportation options? And so also, the planning departments and VIA and transportation and capital improvements are looking at what is that next, and as the mayor had basically said, what's that modern transportation system? How do we give people the options, whether it's walking, biking, or transit? That's going to help us reduce emissions. And then the big one's energy. We like every other place in the country are struggling with this. How do we shift from this a carbon-intensive energy source and decarbonize to renewable sources? And it's not that easy. But how do we do it? What's that pathway? How do we start integrating electric vehicles into our infrastructure to provide a cleaner transportation system? And then how do batteries fit into individual homes? How do we have homes with solar? How do we capture that power and store it, whether it's through an electric vehicle or a separate battery source? What are the code changes or policy decisions that need to occur in order to even allow that to happen? And then equity is really the big thing. Like I mentioned, how do we make sure we do this so it doesn't impact those most vulnerable? And I just want to point out on this picture, somebody had mentioned that this isn't a great image because it shows these people sneaking in and looking at the game, and I want to clarify, this is a free game, and so anybody in the stands didn't have to pay. They're not breaking the law. And then a couple other real quick things in terms of policy direction. How do we quantify value? That's really important because we need to start making decisions that have long-term implications, but they may not have that immediate payback that we usually look for on projects. And so, is it lives saved, jobs created, energy saved, emissions reduced? And then this is really interesting. I was doing some research yesterday. This is from an academic journal in Australia, and this is sort of what we're talking about. If we don't do anything, on the left, it's the percent GMP lost, and it's over time. And so if nothing's done, if there's no mitigation, they're looking at looking at reducing their GMP, and then they have these different scenarios based upon greenhouse gas reduction. So being able to make the business case that if we don't do anything, it's going to cost us. It's this is the idea of cost avoidance. And then what can you do? This is there's lots of things out there. It's your own personal choices in terms of mobility and how you live your lives. And again, really the big thing is the first step is speaking up and being part of the conversation. Jump into this SA Climate Ready conversation. Come to our public meetings, come to steering committee or technical working group meetings. They're all open to the public. Volunteers, that's the big thing we're looking for. We need people to get out into the community and talk to folks and make sure they're aware of this, or host your own meeting. And then really think about, why are we doing this? These are my kids. I look at them and I think about what's the future that's in store for them. It may not seem like it's a huge issue now, but if we look in the future and we look at what their kids are going to be facing with, again, it's the moral imperative, but how do we make it a reality? Thank you.
Hi, thank you to the sustainability staff and those of people from CPS and SAWS. We're kind of standing on their historical work when we look at conservation methods that were put in decades ago. But as then, there were detractors, and now there are too. So our work is really very hard. And the Sustainability Office and the electeds who kind of are at the forefront of bearing that heat are helped by us. We're a climate action coalition. We're called Climate Action San Antonio, and you can find us on Facebook. We have a website. If you're a student, or you can find us on Twitter too. If you're a student, consider interning with us. We're here to engage the community, right? And so we are here to bolster the efforts of the people who have to work in the bureaucratic framework. And so they're limited. And you see that Doug has to build an economic case. He has to mention equity, the immoral imperative. I mean, he has to handle it all. But we are here out in the community trying to help in a similar manner and also in a different manner. And just to give you a little background on me, I'm a community advocate. I've been an environmental advocate for 20 years. And I've worked for the federal government. I've worked for the state government. And my passion and what I really love to do is be out in the community doing this really crucial work. I want to involve you in an exercise. When I say it's really hard work, it's work. And so I want to ask you to take a deep breath, lower your gaze, and think about what inspires you. Do this for 5 seconds. Thanks. Now look at your neighbor and smile. It's going to be awkward, even though, just go ahead and do it. Smile at them. When you were thinking about what inspires you, could it be possibly music, poetry, family, love, friends, companion animals, art, beauty? Was there air pollution, plastic bags in your creeks? Were you drinking tainted water? Could you breathe okay? Do you have asthma? Was it unbearably hot with no AC? I'll stop there. That took a turn, right? That exercise is just to illustrate that we all want good things for ourselves when we think of an ideal. And climate justice is the idea that we want good things for ourselves, but we also want good things for our neighbors. When you look at someone directly and you think, okay, I don't want them to suffer. In our material world right now, if you're religious or not, there's a secular norm that says that, you know, when you're at your best self, you want everything good for everyone. That's a lot to process. Let's reach deeper. Lower your gaze again and breathe in. What do you want to see in San Antonio as a community, in an environment that you idealize? Did that include trees, solar, green roofs, trains, sidewalks, swimmable rivers? But only in half of San Antonio? You saw Doug's map and you saw our vulnerable populations that have suffered from systemic and structural problems, human-made problems that are still occurring today. The redlining for home mortgages of the past with African Americans in our city and those of a lineage that is not of European descent, that is still with us today. The effects of that double and maybe triple the impacts on people. Now, I'm not saying quantifyingly, okay? I'm talking about qualitative life, your quality of life, and I'm talking about measures of impact. So when Doug also says we have to quantify the effects of climate change, we have to take into consideration that there is a myriad of effects that aren't just drought and whether you can pay your heating bill. But there's a historical alignment also that's still with us today. It's a huge paradigm shift to think about climate justice. We kind of have to make what seems impossible practical and practiced. By reaching for it, though, we can grow, and we have to innovate. We must be compassionate and critical at the same time. We must go beyond tolerance and diversity and reach for inclusion. Last part of this is some homework. I know each and every one of you has a cell phone. If you could take that cell phone out right now, I'm going to part ways with you, and I'm going to leave you 3 minutes in which to do this. If you will dial 311 and send the message to your city council person, if you give them your address. If you're a student, all you have to do is say, I'm a Trinity student, and I support the Climate Action Plan. 311 is the city's, they collect metrics. They do a service, and they send messages to any department that you'd like to send the message to, that you either support climate change or mention one thing that you want to see in the Climate Action Plan. Do you want walkability? Do you want whatever it is that you want? Send that message to them. After you do that, you'll be an official member of the Climate Action Coalition. Though we won't spread that, okay? We'll just say thank you to you, and please, we are here, whether you're suffering the impacts of climate change right now, and we want to hear from you, or whether you just want to intern with us, for credit, might I add. If you want to get involved and face a challenge yourself and be challenged, come to us, we're here for you. And I thank you so much for participating in this.
To help facilitate, thank you, I think, for very, very informative and thoughtful reflections by both of you. Sam, could you come down to this microphone here, Sam Gableman, and then Travis to the other one, so you can give the microphones to people who want to ask questions. And the reason you need to use the microphones is we are streaming this, so if you want to be heard in Dublin, you need to be in the microphone. Are there questions? And I'd like to reserve the first two questions to students if they have questions first, and then we'll open it up. Are there any questions from the students in attendance? Okay, if you could take the microphone back and identify yourself, please.
My name is Caroline Curley. I'm in Dr. Burke's global politics class. And my question is for Mr. Melnick. You were talking about some different city-sponsored programs that are aimed at lowering our emissions as a city. Could you go into detail about a couple of those? We heard about Under One Roof, but I was wondering if you could tell me more about a few of the others.
Sure, let's make it my, so, I'm trying to remember what we had. So one thing that was, that we have is we have an energy efficiency revolving fund. Basically, it's for municipal buildings. It's the only one of its kind in the state. So we have about $1 million annually that we invest in existing city facilities to improve energy efficiency, and that could be putting, upgrading lighting or window film or upgrading HVAC equipment. Over the years, it's been around since about 2009. In the couple hundred buildings that we've touched, we've reduced energy use in those by 19.3%, so constantly improving the energy efficiency in our city facilities. CPS has tons of programs. The Saving for Tomorrow Energy program offers energy efficiency rebates, energy audits for homeowners. There's a program, various programs for renewable energy, such as community solar, which provides people the opportunity to buy into a community solar project and receive a rebate on their energy bills, as well as a solar host program for people to basically allow CPS and a contractor to install solar on their rooftop, basically lease their rooftop and also receive a rebate. And then, the big one in terms of emergency preparedness, the city's Office of Emergency Management has a pretty sophisticated program to improve emergency preparedness from the residential home up to the neighborhood level, and basically have an app that basically allows anybody to download it and to determine are they prepared and develop a plan in order to be prepared? So that's just a few that touch on it, and I think the part of this planning process is that we're going on right now is really quantifying everything that's sort of on the books right now. And it's not just city programs. If you look at something like Green Space Alliance that has community gardening program, that is it can be looked at as a climate preparedness program in terms of creating more local food security. It's been shown that taking a vacant property and creating a community garden it basically increases carbon sequestration because of the biodiversity of that garden. So there's lots of different things that have an impact. They just haven't been put under that sort of that climate lens. Sure.
Is there did you want to respond at all, Carol?
I would urge you to, look into those things, but also there are things that the city does that then become, when there's a political change, they become left by the wayside, and so we always have to pressure our electeds that we want these programs, that we actually need them, and please don't let them die on the vine.
Is there another student question? One from the students. Any other student questions? Go ahead.
So,
and identify yourself, okay?
I'm Travis Boyd, just a student here. Took a bunch of classes with Dr. Burke. My question is, given the unlikely nature of federal action on climate policy, at least within the next couple years, do you think that local governments like San Antonio should try more radical proposals at a local level, like a carbon tax or something of that sort?
What we've seen, and I think it's even before this current presidential administration, particularly in this country, the most aggressive action was occurring at sort of the local level. It's always been cities that have really been the ones advocating and innovating and developing programs. I think since this current administration, that's just solidified. There's hundreds and hundreds of mayors who have come out and call themselves climate mayors, and Mayor Nirenberg is one of them, who have created trying to create a block of municipalities, a coalition, to try to increase their voice. And so, yes, I think it's up to local governments to continue to lead and innovate. I think the key is finding out what's going to work for each individual community. I think we've got different assets and different challenges as opposed to other communities, but I think we'd still need to find. I think we need to be as aggressive as possible. I think having a future where there is a federal government that's providing real leadership on this is only going to help. But I think right now it's finding out what's going to work for San Antonio to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And to Carol's point, to make sure that whatever we come up with and start implementing doesn't fall by the wayside as there are shifts in our own local political structure. I mean, it's got to be something that's going to stick and just continue to grow. Whether it's a carbon tax, I don't know. But those are the conversations that are going on right now with the climate plan. Basically, we've said everything's on the table. Let's just throw everything out and then just sort of work through the pros and cons and see where we end up.
Carol, do you have any?
Absolutely. Absolutely, of course. We're going to say that. And the youth, we find that you guys are the ones who want faster change. And the diversity of tactics that you may be able to use are maybe not ones that your local government can really easily implement or push for. However, that's why we would love you at the table, and we have other Climate Action Coalition representatives here. If you would please stand up. Meredith, Jessica, Diane, Greg, you can ask them these questions and more. And we do have young people involved with us, and so I would encourage you to get in on that.
Are there any questions from anyone in the audience? Questions? Yes, if you give the microphone.
Hi. I'm not so much asking a question as tossing this out to the audience. I enjoyed several conversations yesterday with folks who were interested in basically how their congregations could get involved or how they could get their immediate community involved. And I think that that's one of the things that this planning process is really wonderful for, because San Antonio is one of the few cities that's making the climate action and adaptation planning based on equity and making that central to the process, not just an afterthought. And so one of the wonderful things that people can do in your congregations and in your immediate community is to start building community around this idea of what would a just climate action look like, and how can we build our communities to strengthen our communities for resilience in the face of climate change. And that's really sort of, I mean, you can turn that into a question for the people on the, because if you've got some suggestions for how that can happen, I think that's something that I would like to see happen.
If, before you respond, maybe we can get 2 other questions in here so that we have a more collective response, because we're coming close to the end of the hour.
That was Meredith McGuire. I'm Bill Sweet. I am a scientist, retired, and am here sort of semi-representing the Quaker meeting in town. I have 3 questions. I actually have questions. One, the city of San Antonio is fairly active, but it also, the climate and the local environment comprise other municipal jurisdictions as well as the county. And so question 1 is, how is the interaction with the city and these other entities, governmental entities, excuse me, being conducted? The second question is, you mentioned a number of issues of concern, one that I did not, for resiliency, one that I did not hear was food security and agriculture, considering a large, very large fraction of our food is imported, and climate change is projected to affect that substantially, more later in the century than in the fairly near future. But is there any thought about dealing with that? And then the computerized climate projections suggest that there is at least the usual, what I've seen as the usual projection is that there's a 2/3 chance that the projections will be right, that it will be much drier here, longer droughts, more intense droughts, more frequent droughts, with this population and the population increase forecast that is going to stress the water supply. I know Meredith has a lot more to say about that than I do, but those are my 3 questions.
And could we get the other question? And
Yeah,
then we'll have
I have a quick question on the roofless solar, whether that program will continue, and also whether there's been any consideration on the existing solar farms of selling those panels where people could buy them and using the proceeds to build additional solar farms.
These responses will be our closing to this session.
Oh, okay. Well, you got 3 questions. That's not fair to everybody else. But so yes, we are coordinating with other municipalities. I'm talking with Bexar County, working through ACOG, and basically making sure that at a minimum that the surrounding municipalities are aware of our planning process. The challenge is getting people to the table. When we did the SA Tomorrow Sustainability Plan, we went through a similar effort where we would set up having stakeholder meetings with surrounding jurisdictions, and it's hard getting them to the table. But we're committed to making sure that they're part of the conversation, as it's a regional issue. It isn't just a City of San Antonio issue. In terms of food security, you're absolutely right. I see that fitting into sort of the natural resource aspect of the sustainability plan, particularly from the adaptation side. Food security is a huge issue, because if we start seeing global disruptions in the food system as a result of climate, do we have a local foundation to have as much local food security as possible? So I see that part of the conversation with the climate planning process. And then, I'm not sure, what was the specific question related to the climate projections and drought? Was it? I agree, it's a big consideration that we need to look at, but was there a specific question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, right now we received some of the draft climate projections from UTSA. We have them out for some peer review, but we'll be releasing those shortly. And so I think that'll spur the conversation to start looking at as far as what those projections show in terms of drought. But I think the intent is to look at different emission scenarios from low to high to make sure that we're also looking at the extreme as well. And then in terms of roofless solar and the community solar, I think maybe at the break, if you can capture or corner Kim Stoker or Todd Horseman from CPS, raise your hand, guys. And they could, I'm not sure what the plan is for roofless solar. I think the first phase was completed. I think there's probably an assessment going on right now to determine the effectiveness and whether or not it needs to be tweaked. There is a community solar RFP that's out that they'll be developing another community solar project. And I think talking to them about that, what you had mentioned, is there an opportunity of selling off those existing assets, ground-mounted solar, to see if there's a way of financing new solar projects. I think that's a good suggestion as well.
Carol, do you have any thoughts on any of these issues?
No, that I just noticed there were a couple of students in the back that had a question. Perhaps
Well,
you'd like to.
we need to move on. That's in other words with the program. I'm sorry. Okay.
You can catch us.
Because both these organizations will be doing breakouts momentarily. I'd like to give a round of applause to our respondents. Now, before you leave your seats, we are an interfaith community, and we didn't charge anything in terms of registration for this conference to try to make it available to just about anyone. So we're going to have, in good church tradition, a collection. So we will pass the baskets, and please feel free, if you're so moved, to provide a donation, which will help cover conference costs. If there's anything in excess, then we will that goes to the National Religious Coalition for Creation Care, who's been the primary outside sponsor for the for the conference. In addition, before you move, we're going to have now 6 different breakout sessions, which are going to be in